right there.
You're listening to Head South Radio with your host, Kat Meyer, a podcast dedicated to prioritizing pleasure and removing the stigma and shame around sex. We're here to be curious and have an open conversation about sexual health and relational wellness. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes. The information discussed is not a substitute for professional medical advice.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Kat Meyer, and today's episode promises to be both educational and liberating. We have the honor of sitting down with the renowned Dr. Evan Goldstein, the brilliant mind behind Future Method, a sexual wellness brand dedicated to all things anal sex. Exploring topics surrounding anal play, rectal health, and breaking down the barriers of stigma, today's episode is not only informative, but aims to unravel the intricacies of a subject that is often whispered about rather than openly discussed. Dr. Evan, a trailblazer in the field of sexual health, is here to share his wealth of knowledge, debunk myths, and answer some burning questions, all while encouraging a healthy, shame-free dialogue. So whether you're curious, experienced, or just looking to broaden your understanding, this episode promises to be an eye-opener. Dr. Evan even throws in a bold recommendation that might just surprise you. Get ready to dive deep into the world of anal pleasure and health as we embark on this enlightening conversation with the incredible Dr. Evan Goldstein. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I'm really excited to interview you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to get started, I like to do some icebreakers before we move into the questions.
Sure.
So marry, fuck, kill, beach, mountains, or desert?
Oh, beach.
Yeah. Would you marry the beach, fuck the beach, or kill the beach?
I would, I'd fuck the beach.
Okay. Would you marry or kill the mountains or the desert?
I'd marry the mountains and kill the desert.
Okay, cool. I'd fuck the beach too. Do you believe in love at first sight?
Yeah, I do.
How do you like to be comforted when you're sad?
I'll be left alone.
What's sexy to you, morning sex or evening sex?
Evening.
If you could create your ideal pornography, what would it feature?
Oh, geez. What would it feature? That's putting me on the spot. Like as in the scene, or like how many people are involved, or what situation?
Yeah, anything that you would like to see featured in your ideal pornography. So it could be any of those.
Oh God, I'm gonna decline on answering this one. It's just
pass on that one. How do you define intimacy?
I think it's so many different levels. I think you could be intimate with someone, but not sexual. I think to me, it's a mental space. And it could be with one person, it could be with multiple people. It doesn't necessarily have to be naked and body on body in some capacity.
Yeah. So, one last one. Marry, fuck, kill, burgers, nachos, pizza.
Oh, God. I don't eat really any of that stuff. So I would probably say kill them all.
Okay. And then tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my name is Dr. Evan Goldstein. I'm a surgeon by trade, but I do a lot of different things. I do a lot of media. I do a lot of podcasts and discussions and sexual education. I have a products company called Future Method. I own surgery centers. So I do a lot of things in the space, but it all centers around anal health and sexual wellness. A lot of it is really looking at how people engage. How do we make sure that people engage correctly, have the education to support that, have access to healthcare that allows them to live the life that they want, and destigmatizing, getting the taboo out of anything that anybody wants. We only have one life, and however you want to engage and live your life is yours. And how do we empower that, but also provide the care, the products, the education to support it?
So that's pretty much my next question, which was, what's the inspiration behind Future Method? And it sounds like it's
Yeah, it's really stemmed from, community-based practice. When I first started, I was training to be a heart surgeon. I was miserable. I was in the closet, and a lot of things were more on me to finally come out and approach the world. And when I did that, I started to really look specifically within the gay community to say, what type of care do people have access to? And I started to ask simple questions. Do people talk about sex? If you're going to see a gay practitioner, do they ask questions about your sexual world? Do people feel comfortable? Where do they go? And you started to realize that when I first started this, that there was just such a lack of access. And that was the birth of Bespoke Surgical, which was, how do we just provide a place that really destigmatizes and takes away the taboo, but has the solutions to get people into whatever sexual space that they want? Or if they get injured, how do they have a place that they can get fixed and be re-educated and communicated? And when you start to provide community-based care, you start to see all the faults that come with it, right? Mm-hmm. Your own stigma, your own internalized homophobia, your own community-based issues, lack of access, and then lack of products that support the way people engage. And, what I do is not specific to the gay space, though clearly, obviously, gay men are having a lot of anal intercourse, but clearly we know women and all facets of human life engage anally. So with Future Method, it was kind of bridging. It was like, how do we bring science into sex, but also looking at it from a community-based perspective, mm-hmm. and then create products that not only support the engagement, but also risk reduce it, because we know anal sex has consequences. And so with that, it was, it's the first of its kind. It's been an amazing ride to kind of really start to hit different sections and sectors of this sexual wellness world. And I think that what you're doing is awesome, because a lot of the gap between what we do in the surgical, office setting to the product setting, there's still so much that needs to be done on a popular press perspective to kind of help with the stigma and mm-hmm. help with the education. And so that was a lot of what I do with Emily and the crew at MML, and then working with you and all this, is to kind of first, what are the issues that we're trying to tackle, and then slowly start working into the education side to normalize the conversation.
I appreciate that very much, because that's exactly why the podcast exists, is to normalize these conversations, and to also, I think for a lot of people, if I have found with sex, especially our taboo subjects, if it's not affecting you, you don't look and try to find the information. So there is no even relational support. So if you have a partner going through something, or a family member or a friend who is curious or looking for information, how do we relationally help and support each other and build community around that? So it doesn't have to be you specifically, let's say in this case, like interested in anal sex, but you might know someone who wants that information, and you can share that and listen to this episode and, share that information. I was curious what type of products Future Method offers.
Yeah, so it's kind of the way that I think in the office, which is, what do people do before sex, kind of the pre, mm-hmm. and then the actual play itself? How do people engage sexually? And then what's the aftercare? So a lot of what we do from a products perspective is fitting into those specific categories. And then we have another category, which is called the daily, which is, again, it's trying to think of like a whole body health, pun intended, mm-hmm. versus just specifically anal health. Mm-hmm. The first product we launched with was an appropriate anal douche cleansing solution. So we know a lot of things with cleaning. We know that people clean way too much. They use way too much product, and they're not using the right products. They're using either water or enemas. And the reality is that both of them are on polar ends of the spectrum, and they both cause trauma. So inside our anal canals, we have these cells, and these cells are supporting what we're doing from a pooping perspective and from a sex perspective. But when you use douching liquids, when you use water-based lubes, when you use all of these stuff, whether it's oils, etc., the lining of the inside can become quite irritated. And you don't feel it because the sensations are much different. There's no real pain receptors in that space. So you're using water, you're over douching, you're creating so much irritation that right when you're engaging anally, you're either so swollen and irritated, or you have a higher chance of getting an STD or infection. So the goal was, okay, well, if people are douching, which they are, how do we educate people to douche less? How do we educate people to use apparatuses that are less volume? And then how do we place a liquid solution that's not toxic, that's not irritating? So it comes as a pre-filled kind of a pouch with a small bulb. And then also there's lots of people who want to use their own bulbs. No matter what I say you're over douching. They say, I don't give a shit. This is what works for me. It's like, okay, great. So then what we have these powder packs that for every 4 ounces of water, you can put into the bulb so that you're, again, we want you to feel clean. We want you to feel sexy and for it to be silky, but we want the solution to be what's called isoosmolar or isotonic, which is it cleans the cells, but it doesn't irritate the cells. So that's really what plays with kind of that product. Obviously, on the daily stuff, we have fiber supplementation. How do you bulk your stool, making it soft and easy to poop? Because we know people want to clean. So a lot of what we're doing is to say, even though we're a douche company, it's saying if you're using fiber and you're using our pre and probiotics, how do we create an environment where you either don't need to douche, or if you are douching, you're able to douche less. I get it. Everybody wants to be super clean, feel sexy, not bloated, and not shit on their partner or partners. I get that. So this is kind of saying, how do we look at fiber and pre and probiotics, which we have in the Future Method line? How do we look at the douching approaches of which people are doing, which we have? We also have an anal exfoliant, a button body scrub, and a soothing cream. Again, sex is traumatic. Wiping your ass from just routine pooping is traumatic. You can get micro tears and have irritation. And so by fostering an environment similar to how we take care of our face with facials and all the work that we do, anally, it's the same concept, which is how do we nourish the tissue? How do we make sure we're getting rid of bad skin and replenishing with hydrated and well-nourished tissue to then support it with lotions that are specific to the anal region. We know that excess moisture causes bacterial infections, herpes infections, a lot of issues, fungal. And so again, we want to create an environment that's healthy, but also dry. So any appropriate lotions that we're using, especially on the Future Method brand, is quick to act, but quick to dry on purpose. And then we go into kind of the dilating phase. So we have anal dilators, which are glass, which are specific, small, medium, and large. And it comes as a kit. And it's all from what I learned in the office, which is people either they don't have the right education to understand how they get to anal, or they've tried it and had a terrible experience, or you don't ever want to engage in anal, but your partners do, and you want them to have all the right tools to get them to where they need to be, especially with female skin or male to female transgenders being on estrogens and all of the different components. What happens is that the skin is so thin, it can get irritated and it can tear quite easily. So by understanding that you can't go from nothing to something big, by using toys and using glass and using silicone-based lubes, and by creating an environment that goes very slow from small to medium to large, it's usually about a 6-week protocol for appropriate getting into anal. It now sets the stage for the skin to be tough enough to withstand the pressures of sex, and also for you to be able to learn how to relax the 3 muscles. So again, all of these products play into a different mindset. right? And for people to start thinking it's not just, oh, shove it in and I'm good. It's like, no, like everything, like going to the gym, like doing everything in that capacity, you need the right ingredients, the right tools, the right education, the right support to accomplish what you're asking of it.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge how intentional and so thought out that whole, like, your product line is incredible.
Thanks.
From a purpose-driven standpoint of, like, you saw in practice the issues, and it doesn't look or feel from the outside observer like something like, hey, now we're going to sell these things, like these one-off products in addition. But it's really thought out of, like, how do we support our patients who are coming in with these issues, or how do we educate? And I appreciate that so much. There's such an intentionality of each aspect of that. And I was sitting here going, holy shit, why have they never taught this in sex education of these different stages and preparations? It's mind. I'm like sitting gobsmacked, like, whoa.
Yeah, I think that's what's a differentiator between our company. I mean, I think the sexual wellness space is enormous, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many people are entering the space, so many companies, and everything is basically white labeled and private labeled and just looks really nice.
Mm-hmm.
But the purpose driven of, like, how do we make sure that the lubes that people are selling are actually not causing yeast infections and irritations, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we take responsibility from what products we're putting out there to look at risk? I see risk every day, right? You
Mm-hmm.
walk outside your door in New York City, you could have a piece of plastic falling off a building and kill you, right? But with sex, there's inherent risks with everything that we're doing. And when you start to take a step back, the difference of me seeing it firsthand in the office, right? I see 90 patients a week. I do 15 surgeries a week. And so when you start to see community-based issues, you start to see the same issues over and over and over. And I tell people all the time, especially in surgery and medicine, if someone is just doing a little bit of everything, they're good. They're not fucking great.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you get good? And how do you get great? And how do you get amazing? You look at the best guitarist in the world. They play the same fucking song every day for the rest of their lives. And that is how you get to be good. And it's the same concept on what we're doing in the surgical practice. Because we see that volume and specifically sexual related trauma in that capacity, we start to now really are able to say, okay, how do we implement this, and this to really look at risk and bring the reduction down? It's super empowering for not only for you and this is like for us too. It's like we see the end game of success stories and of like where people can go sexually. I say, if you take the ass away from a bottom, it's fucking catastrophic. People, I've come to my office completely suicidal, completely with relationships ruined. There is a lot going on. And it needs to be understood that it's no different than someone saying, let's close up your vagina. And then you just have to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's great. No problem. You're like, no, that's a big fucking problem. And how are we going to approach it in a way that just really, really hits the nail on the head for everybody?
Speaking of which, do you have advice around anal play for different genders? You kind of mentioned that a little bit of, like, especially with the dilators and preparation and different skin.
Yeah,
and so
totally.
When you're advising someone, do you take into consideration their gender as well as their orientation?
So everything. I think that, again, a lot of it is first creating an environment specifically in the office or how we approach with Future Method. Again, not all asses are created equal, right? Anatomically, the parts are there, but we know specifically in women that the skin is much thinner, or in the trans community from male to female. We know that from female to male, by using testosterone, the skin will thicken, but hair will grow in the air, and there's more friction because of that. We know that females are supposed to, in life, give birth, right? That's a lot of what, and so the pelvic floor, the muscles are not as tight and or strong. Why? Because it needs pliability in order to pop out a 9-pound baby, right? all of these things. And then you look at all of that, and also like who is coming into me. If it's a 50, 60-year-old, 70-year-old guy who was through the HIV AIDS era, their approach to anal is so different than a younger 17, 18, 19-year-old kid who is like right now so fluid and into fisting that their approaches are so different. So I think, again, it's finding practitioners or finding sex therapists or people that are going beyond to truly understand what we're asking during the act. And by that, you're then able to now set the stage for that success. At the end of the day, it's how do we get the muscle to fully open? Remember, anally, there's 3 sets of muscles. There's 2 on the outside and 1 inside. The 2 on the outside, if I ask you to squeeze your ass right now, or anyone that's listening, you're squeezing the 2 on the outside. The 1 on the inside, it's called the internal sphincter, is the one that you and I don't have control over. So that's the one in a lot of people when you're trying to enter, you're like, I feel like I'm relaxed, but you can't get the toy in, you can't get the penis in, it just won't fully relax. And so by understanding the concept of, hey, we need the skin to open like an accordion, we need the muscles to learn to function together, and giving you, instead of 3 muscles working independently, 3 muscles working together. How do we start to understand our own anatomy? And that's really a lot with the toy work that we do with Future Method, because in the office at Bespoke, I can tell you just from doing a special test whether or not you would be good at anal. And it's about 1/3 of people anally are set up to take it up the ass. Okay, but that means 2/3 will either have a really bad first initial attempt and be like, I'm never fucking doing that again. And that's a shame, right? Or people will continue to try, but feel limited, whether it's the skin doesn't fully open and it tears, whether the muscle doesn't fully relax. All of these things play into it. And I break the sex into these categories. Like category 1 is, can you do things on your own with better education, with a glass dilating kit that understands the anatomy, right? And by doing that on your own, you're able to kind of understand, because a lot of people are in places that they don't have access to this type of care, which is to say, how do I know which type of a bottom I am? It's like, all right, it's using these toys, starting with the small toy 1 to 2 times a week, working with understanding your anatomy, where you start to say, hey, okay, great. This feels really good. Great. I can go from small into medium and gradually work the process. Or you may start with the small and be like, fuck, I can't get this thing in. It's so painful. It's irritating me. And then we know that, hey, you're probably in that 2/3 of a group that has limitations. And so the first bucket is, can you do things on your own to get into a good space? And 1/3 to 40% of people will be fine. Then it's bucket 2 is, maybe I need to do physical therapy with a pelvic floor therapist. Maybe I need to do anal Botox, which I do a lot of, into that muscle that won't listen to URI. It's called the internal sphincter, which we spoke about. By doing a small in-office procedure, you're able to get that muscle to relax. And so what happens is, now you can actually dilate and use the toys effectively. Remember, it's just like a rubber band. Some people's rubber bands are really tight. Some people's rubber bands are just right. And we have to figure that out. But over time, with either the toys alone or Botox in the toys, you're able to start getting more elasticity. I say, think about, like, you ever get like a restoration catalog or one of these big that has like a huge rubber band on it. And you take that rubber band and you're like, fuck, you can't open it. But every day, if you stretch it just a little bit, what happens to that rubber band? It starts to get a little bit more lax. And it's the same concept with that. So bucket 1, toys alone and anatomy and education. Bucket 2, physical therapy, adding anal Botox. And then bucket 3 is, are there things that are limiting you, whether it's a skin tag or a hemorrhoid? I see a lot of post-pregnancy hemorrhoids that cause friction You don't feel sexy with G-strings and vaginal sex, and yet alone anal sex, it irritates. It creates friction in that space. So some people have skin tags or hemorrhoids or chronic scar or what's called a fissure. All of these things can limit those first two buckets where you are now like, well, wait a second, mentally I want to take dick, or mentally I want to take toys. I can't. What can I do? And then it's a surgical bucket. And that's a lot of what I do on the surgical side. So it's a lot of me talking. I'm sorry. I just keep rambling on.
No, it's really, it's fascinating because it's also, you mentioned like pelvic floor therapists, and I've worked and interviewed a lot of PT therapists, especially around women's health and postpartum. Sure. And I know that it's a newer movement, I would say, and like trying to find legitimacy in the healthcare world of like these clinics coming up. And a lot of them are advocating for men to come for things like erectile dysfunction, as well as for supporting anal pleasure and anal play and that experience.
And it doesn't even need to be the anal play pleasure side.
Yeah.
There's so many people that come to our practice that don't ever want anything up their ass, but they have pelvic floor dysfunction. They have chronic prostatitis. I think everybody should take it up the ass. It just makes pooping so much easier. It makes the stress of your life. And I think sexually, you've never had a prostate orgasm or in a spot, which is for non-prostate bearing. By stimulating towards the back, the nerve endings that are there are that much greater that most people, when they have or lose the stigma or their own pressures or own internalized homophobia, the actual orgasms that are produced are just so much greater. But I get everybody's stigma associated with it. It's a huge barrier.
Yeah. And that was my next question, is like the next layer of that I've been finding around even PT health, pelvic floor health, is that the psychological. So it's like, if it's not bucket A, it's not bucket B, it's not the physical, you're able to do this, but there is some type of thinking or belief system that's preventing some of this. What is your advice to, your patients?
I tell people like I do 60% functional physical work and I do 40% mental and psychosocial, right? I mean, it's a huge component. And whether it's gay men that have this dirty act of anal, this internalized homophobia or trauma in the past, which is very common, or hetero men who think that if you take it up the ass that you're a homosexual, to women that just find it, they would love the pleasures, but they find that they're never clean enough or that they're constantly tearing. There's so much that goes into it. And then take alone, Instagram, Facebook, and all the pressures of how we look and how we feel and all this, and then supplement and put that into the anal space. It's daunting. There's so many barriers to allowing people. But that's where I think it starts early, right? It's like, how do we really start to really sexually educate people in a way that allows this to not be even in their thought process? And I think when you look specifically at the younger generation that is super fluid, right? That is in this space where that's not even part of their purview. It's super refreshing to see that because at the end of the day, they're focused on pleasure. Pleasure as a bigger bucket is derived from so many things that it shouldn't have stereotypical approaches to understand what pleasure is. I find, again, but it's also community centers. You look at African American population, there's so many barriers as it relates to that. Catholic and Asian population, right? You start to see like, it's not only your own, it's who you grew up in and all of these things. And it's a lot. But I think if you start to look back and say, first of all, how does my mind think from, do I want to engage in those pleasures? Then it's, if you do, how do you start to kind of look at each of those stigmas and stereotypes and start to work on them? Because you're right. If you don't have the psyche to get into the right space with toys and working at it, this is like going to the gym. You have to actually put effort. And if you're not, then you're going to wind up having either lackluster engagement or not being able to get to where you want to be. But I think that having these conversations is super important because now you start to really say, well, wait a second. I do want to engage and I do want to feel pleasure. And maybe I'm a top. And I always say to tops, are you a top because it's like your MO, you don't want anything in your ass? Or are you a top because it's painful and it's limiting? If I were to make it so pleasurable for you, would you bottom? And 9 times out of 10, they're all like, hell yeah, I would totally take it up the ass, but I just feel X, Y, and Z.
That was one of my crowdsourced questions, which I'm going to get into. I crowdsourced a few questions, and that was one of them is, what's your advice for tops? And I feel like that's a pretty good piece of advice is like, what is making you identify or choose to be a top, and have you tried?
Yeah, I think that again, I think first off, any top that's a good top has bottomed because you really need to know that there's a lot of work that goes into that, from the preparation, the dilating, to the cleaning, to the understanding positions and understanding your anatomy. It's not an easy task, even though porn and everything else, looks at this and you're like, oh yeah, this is great, just shove it in. That's not the way that it usually works, right?
Right.
So I think from a top perspective, it's like, how do you be a really good top? And understanding that you need good foreplay. You need to use toys to pre-dilate and allow people to get into a good space. It's not just, oh, I'm going to get behind you and shove it in. It's how do I make sure that it's a consensual environment? How do I make sure that we're facing each other so I could see that he's not or she's not in pain and or grimacing, right? And allow that to really start to create better sexual engagement. And then I think it's analyzing your own aspect of why are you a top? Because a lot of people are that stereotypical societal pressures that are putting that to be like, and that's why I say, like, are you a top because of this? Or like, if I were to make your ass open up nicely and take it up there and you feel pleasure, would you do it? And I'll be like, hell yeah, I would do it. And I also see a lot of tops, it's like changes. So like a lot of tops, what they'll do is they're in a long-term relationship, that relationship will end. And in order for them to stay relevant, they need to bottom. Or they're having erectile dysfunction issues where they can't keep it up for as long, where they can't top as much, where in order to be relevant and be in a partnership or with partners, that they have to start to engage anally. So it's very interesting of like, again, all of those pieces coming together. But I think the key component to all of this, I think, is if we were to educate correctly early on and set the stage for that positive aspects to all of this and the protocols to get people where they need to be, I think we would also see a lot less injuries and a lot less issues that I'm seeing in the office.
Yeah, less injuries, less stigmas around it, or less breakups, like couples falling apart because they're not able to access that and connect with one another.
Totally.
Let's take a quick break. Hey there. Allow me to introduce you to something that has completely transformed my body, the floss. The floss isn't just a trend, it's a movement method that has reshaped the way I approach my well-being. Imagine a subscription-based platform that offers you a key to unlocking your body's potential. Fascia flossing, as it's called, doesn't just scratch the surface. It remaps the fascia network of your body. Through a tailored blend of physical manipulation, guided resistance movement, and muscle elongation techniques, it's like giving your body a personalized renovation. Since adding the floss to my daily practice in 2019, I've experienced incredible improvements across the board. My mind-body connection is stronger than ever. And let's talk about the intimate aspects. Yes, it has boosted my sexual health connection too. You can hear more about that in the episode I recorded with the founder of the floss, Bonnie Krotzer. The floss supports all of my body systems, enhances mobility, offers prevention, and provides that active recovery we all need. Curious to learn more? Head over to thefloss.com, and if you use the code HEADSOUTH, HEADSOUTH, all caps, no spaces, you'll receive 50% off the first month. Let's get back to the podcast. Can I ask you about anal bleaching? This is a crowd-sourced question. They were like, what is anal bleaching?
Yeah. So obviously anal bleaching can be many different things, but it's just changing the architecture of the tone of the skin in that space. There's many ways that people can do it. It's where the sun doesn't shine, right? So a lot of people just from friction with hair and rubbing and wiping, and some people use wet wipes, and I'm anti-wet wipes, so we can go into that. But all of that can create either dark spots or just regions that there's some blotchy or discoloration. And a lot of people really work with BBLs and a lot of work with butt acne and all that stuff on the butt side, but yet anally, there can be those discolorations that make people not really happy in life. And so by anal bleaching, you're basically doing that. You're trying to kind of make everything flat and flush, make it aesthetically appealing. And the reality is that it depends on where you want to go and how many shades of skin tone you want to get to. Some people are just using over-the-counter skin lightening creams. There's a couple that I really like. Some of them have, most of the over-the-counter natural ones. There's another one that's called hydroquinone, which is more through prescription or through dermatological offices. But they're basically just lightening components. So if someone were to do anal bleaching with us, they're using a hydroquinone cream for 2 weeks before they come in. And then we do an appropriate anal bleaching peel. And then people do the creams after. But some people don't want to do the peel and they say, hey, I just want a little bit. So by just doing some of the OTC stuff, you're able to get a couple of shades lighter to what you want. And look, I mean, I've definitely seen my fair share of bleached hulls. If it's done correctly, it looks fucking amazing. I mean, it looks really, really beautiful. It's just a matter of what you're trying to achieve and how you want to get there.
And then going back to what you mentioned, why are you anti-wipe?
So wipes cause a lot of issues. First of all, environmentally, they're just terrible, right? They get clogged in all the toilets and the sewage systems, and it's just really bad. Second is that I see a huge amount of outbreaks of herpes or anal warts from HPV or bacterial and fungal and viral infections, just simply because of either the fabric, the moisture, or the ingredients. And I know people are listening, they're like, I love the wipes and all this, but I think it should be banned. And companies are making a huge amount of profit. We at Future Method did not go strategically into wipes because we care about your ass. And the reality is I have yet to find a wipe that wasn't going to cause these issues. And people are like, well, we use them on babies. Why can't we use it on our ass? And you're like, well, babies over time develop a huge reaction to them. If you look at when you see a kid and their like mouths are all red and you're like, why are they crusted and irritated? It's because the mother and fathers, what they do is they wipe the wipes on their face to get rid of the extra food. And then over time, they start developing these terrible reactions. And again, the face, it dries. The ass, it doesn't. People are like, oh, great, let me just use a wipe and pull up my underwear and go on with my day. And now I'm sitting in moisture. I'm sitting in ingredients that are not appropriate for that space. So I tell people I'm a huge bidet fan. They're super cheap. It's so easy to install. You can pop in the shower or work with the Future Method system of fiber and pre and probiotics and shit to the point where you don't have to wipe. I think you look at dog poop and you're like, why do dogs shit that way? It's like their diet is so good. They're high in fiber, appropriate protein, and you don't have to wipe as much. And so if you're less wiping, it's less irritating. It creates this entire environment that works really well anally. Because now think of just the shitting mechanism. Now all of a sudden we're asking it to have sex. All the different pressures along that lines, it's just greatly enhanced. So I would say you want to use the wipes for like wiping cum off your belly or your face. You want to use it for like, cleaning your phone or your kitchen. I'm totally fine with that. But for your a-hole, I would say stay away.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, a very sensitive area. It makes sense to not use that. And the baby wiping thing, that makes a lot of sense too, because I've seen a lot of kids with that irritation.
Totally.
Even like makeup wipes.
Totally.
I've been using them for years and I'm trying to move away from that and using just like micellar water and like cleansing pads and not using wipes.
And again, it's not like here and there. If someone's going to use it here and there, it's not a big deal. But everyone's like, it becomes a daily thing. And then you start to really have significant reactions. I see so many anal warts to herpes outbreaks from these wipes. And the second we stop the wipes, it's like you're normal. Remember, there's good and bad bacteria anally. And this goes for wipes, it goes for douching, and what we're trying to do is keep that homeostasis. When you irrigate with water or you're using these wet wipes, what you're doing is you're swinging the pendulum away from the microbiome being in equilibrium. And so that's the key. We all know body wise that just from everything, we're trying to keep everything in homeostasis. Same concept anally, whether it's penetrative or just externally, it's the same concept. And the key is less is always more in anything that we're doing.
I, for a decade, worked in hair care, and one of the product companies I worked for was literally going against shampoo because we're trained to use shampoo and wash our hair, and that
totally,
it's the same stuff that you wash your car with. Like, it's so powerful, those detergents. And that's why we have to have conditioner, and then why we have to have more products.
That's right.
The start of it is the cycle of consumerism in
totally.
that. And it creates a problem. Like, your hair is frizzy because you're shampooing it, not because you have frizzy hair.
I know. I remember I was always making fun of my sister-in-law because she would literally wash her hair maybe every other week. And I was like, oh my God. And she's like, Evan, as like, and it's so true. The natural oils and everything, it's just super important. And it's the same concept, whether it's your hair on your head or your hair in your ass.
Exactly. Absolutely. The skin is sensitive, and it tries to adapt to whatever environmental exposure you're creating. So if you're putting wipes and things and pulling things out and over cleaning creates a system where the body is trying to function and support itself. Just two more questions from crowdsource. Can pregnant people have anal sex?
Yes, they totally can have anal sex. I mean, I think, again, this is something that you need to speak to your gynecologist and OB/GYN just to kind of communicate and make sure we're all on the same page as it relates to that. I think just like with vaginal sex, you totally can. Same thing from an anal perspective. I think, again, you have to think a little bit, though, of understanding anally, especially long-term, second trimester, third trimester. There's a lot more hemorrhoids. There's a lot more swelling from the pressure. So you may not feel too sexy to actually want to do that. So you have to kind of see. A lot of times I do a lot of anal Botox in women during pregnancy because they want to minimize hemorrhoids, or they have a history of having too tight of a pelvic floor. And so by locally reducing the pressure, it allows for the baby to sit in the right space, but not cause some of these complications, especially if you're going through vaginal deliveries. So I think that the answer is yes. We all want to be safe, right? With any type of sex, you can poke a specific region and then create some issues. But I think with speaking with a professional and working with the OB/GYN to set the stage for success, a lot of times I tell people, look, do things on your own first. Don't commit to penetrative sex with others until you've done it on your own. Use a small toy. I even tell people, regardless of whether they want penetration during pregnancy, to use small toys to help with the pelvic floor, because the more you do during the pregnancy helps with the delivery, then helps post. Again, you look at episiotomies that fuck up that area. You look at pushing out babies that should have had C-section, but then destroy the vaginal and anal tissue to the point where people are debilitated post that or can't engage with vaginal sex just because of functionality, pain, and aesthetic components. All of that plays into this. So I even think it's really imperative for OB/GYNs to start doing pelvic floor analysis during pregnancy. Like why aren't we doing manometry studies to evaluate what the capacity is, not only just from measurements, but functionality? Because I can tell people right from the get-go who's going to develop fissures and tears and hemorrhoids just from looking at the anatomy. So a lot of this is, for everyone that's listening, is like using toys for pleasure, but also using toys to understand your own anatomy and then the functionality just to help with better pooping, better shitting, better sex, better pregnancy, that type of stuff.
Any advice for oral anal play? So rimming.
Yeah, analingus is huge. I mean, it's, go to the races. I mean, whatever you want to do. I mean, I think, analingus is a great segue into anal, right? It's a great foreplay. It helps with good relaxation. externally, there's so many amazing nerve endings in that space. That's why, kissing, licking, blowing in that space, in the grooves, kind of in the groin area, all the way back. It's so sensitive, which is the reason why everyone should take it up the ass and enjoy. But with that being said, I think, again, some people douche. If you're not having penetrative sex, do you need to? Well, you have to see. Like, if you're gaping a lot and you feel like it's appropriate to do that, then do it. But less is always more. I think, obviously, showering, we do a lot with the butt and body scrub, with the exfoliant, with Future Method, that most people, before you're having sex in any capacity, you're going to shower. So by creating an environment in that space that is appropriate, I think it'll help you feel sexier and then feel like you're in a good space to engage and enjoy analingus, right? And rimming. And then you decide on the douching side. Our Future Method Soothing Cream has has a scent to it that I really love, but that scent is also edible. So, again, what we wanted to do is there's these scents, which are called grass scents, if I'm saying it correctly, that are able to be ingested and are able to give you, hey, this smells really appetizing and appropriate, but also that you're not just eating things that shouldn't be there.
Mystery fragrance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great warm up and aspect into anal. And again, for people that are hetero and in the space, it's like, you look at people that get into fingering or licking and rimming and then finally into anal. It's a stepwise progression that you would feel comfortable with to set the stage for success on whatever you deem is your anal play. And just, we support all, I support all comers, literally.
I love that. You've partnered with Psychus?
Psychus,
yes.
Psychus.
And it's a nonprofit organization advocating for everyone's right to accurate and comprehensive sexuality information. And what are you doing with them? And looking ahead, what is your vision for Future Method, for Bespoke, and everything you're doing?
Yeah, I think the key is the education, right? And how do we look at government and how do we start talking about difficult subjects that I don't find very difficult, but the world does. So what we need to do is we need to honor that and understand that and start to kind of break those barriers down. First, it needs to be with the government and looking at, what everyone's right to appropriate access to healthcare and education, specifically on a sex ed perspective. I think SICUS itself, is rooted in that, which is how do we go to Washington and really make sure that people have access to this type of education. But it's also educating Washington.
Yeah.
And that's a difficult task. And again, are we going to get into junior high school and high schools to talk about anal, let alone gay sex? No. That's going to be years and years and years, I think. But what we can do is start to really put all of these curriculums out there that people have access to, talk more about all of these issues, create an environment that people see that we're looking for change. And that's what's so cool about not only Bespoke Surgical, but Future Method and what we're doing, which is like, again, it's so great to be part of a company where it's not just, oh yeah, here, buy our product, right? We get that whole system is more along the lines of how do we educate? How do we start normalizing the conversation? How do we make sure that people are protected in Capitol Hill to support that? How do we educate parents that their kids could be engaging in X, Y, and Z? And how do we create an environment that is supportive? So we, with SICUS, have launched this. I just did a huge podcast with them, which was amazing. And we're doing a lot of work with them moving forward. We have different swag stuff from like candles to sex towels to hats, things that push the narrative in a fun, cheeky way, but also then the proceeds go back into the SICUS side to allow for just betterment across all channels for everybody.
I have to note that your merch and the branding and products, everything is so well done and also so intentional and beautiful. And so it's not just like purpose, but it's also like there is an aesthetic and a branded look it's very powerful and it's very catchy.
Oh, thanks.
And I really, as a brand nerd, as someone who has her own brand, I appreciate that so much. It's so well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We have a lot of work to do in all things anal, but but it's super exciting, and I appreciate all the support and comments.
Yeah. Is there anything else that we missed that you want to close with, or anything you'd like to share? How do people find you?
Yeah, so I do obviously through the surgical practice. It's called Bespoke Surgical. So all the different channels. Future Method is the Future Method on Instagram, but everything else is futuremethod.com. My own personal world, I have a partner of 18 years. We have two twin boys together through surrogacy. So Dr. Evan Goldstein, Dr. Evan Goldstein is the Instagram handle that you can kind of see kid life to anal life to sex life all mixed into. So that's always a fun
to
mix.
Concerts too, because I follow you
To
and
concerts.
you
I'm a
post
huge
concerts.
concert.
Yeah.
I'm a big music guy.
Yeah.
So I usually do a lot of the concert stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then anything that anyone needs, DM, I'm super supportive. We do a lot of Zoom calls. We do a lot of stuff globally. People fly into New York if you don't have access to this type of care. I think the key with all of this is creating that environment so people feel comfortable and safe. Then they understand their own anatomies to start kind of putting in certain components through some of the future method stuff, the bespoke stuff, so that they're able to get to the end goal. The end goal is what you want, and that should be met. And so all of what we do is how do we analyze that? And some people come to me before they start, which is the preferred, because we're able to really understand where they need to go and can they get there and how do they do it safely. Others are coming because it's injured or hurt or limited. And I say to people, at the end of the day, there's so many approaches, non-operative to operative, that will allow you to get to the end goal of what you want. It just depends. And it's so cool that we started this kind of sexual world that allows people the access to this type of care. Think about 10, 15 years ago. Where was everybody going? They're just like, okay, anal's off the table. It's like, well, hold on a second. How cool is it that it shouldn't be? And that we have access to this type of care and surgical practices and the product side. So, when someone comes to me and sends me letters or sends me stuff of like, hey, I took it up the ass and thank you so much and like that. I mean, it's like, it's how cool is that? We change people's lives for the better day in and day out. And it's super fun to be in the sex space.
It's an incredible achievement and accomplishment. I had one personal question too. How did your family, your support system, the people around you, when you decided to move into this? Because you originally were going into heart surgery.
Yeah.
And that's part of your coming out journey, but it also then you pivoted career-wise as well. And how did that, how did that land?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andy and I, my partner, we spoke many times on this, and he actually didn't think it was going to be successful when we were talking. He was like, why do people care? Who gives a shit if you go to a gay guy, a gay surgeon? Like, you can go to anybody. Why don't you just go to somebody that's just the best, that fixes you? And I said, well, I don't think that person exists. I said, everybody is so focused on the success of, are you shitting? Instead of, are you shitting and do you want to engage anally? And then how do you get to that space, of what you want? Finally, I just said, you know what, I'm going to do this. And then we started it. And then it's just evolved into brand and going to Future Method. And then I wrote a book, and the book is coming out soon. And so there's lots of different components to this, but it all stems to the educational side and access to something that wasn't there. And again, that's what's so cool about community-based practices, is that you look at communities and you fill the void that is there that is not there, to say, hey, wait a second, we can. And then I had to learn a whole different way of how does the ass heal for sex? How do we work it? How do we do? And so it's a whole team of so many parts and moving pieces to this that allow us to get there. But it's super rewarding.
It's incredible. And it's, I'm sure, life-changing for so many people, because it's all of the things, but it's also the way that you present it. And it's so accessible and it's engaging. Like, you're very engaging.
Thanks.
And so I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people who are scared or apprehensive, have anxiety around this, to come and sit with you or with your team and learn about this stuff and hear this and feel like, I could imagine a lot of people feel a sense of relief when they find you.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. Or it takes them so many years to get there because they've had so much
Ugh.
baggage associated with it
Yeah.
that, we just hope that everybody just drops that shit and says, okay, I want to do this, and I can't do that unless I go, and do things. Because at the end of the day, most people after I operate or do something say to me, I should have just done this years ago. What the fuck was I thinking,
Yeah. It's so empowering. And so I thank you so much. I appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
and for your knowledge and for you sharing this and creating this. I think it's incredible for so many people in the world. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Special thanks to all of our guests. Head South is hosted by Kat Meyer, produced by Isis Barlow, edited by Megan Hook, with music by Lily Rezi Rothman, graphics by Ella Chodos Irvine, cover art by Gina Ship Casey, and intro by Murph Meyer.
If you're looking for